This is the brick wall example I like to use for my classes in order to demonstrate the process of building maps for Maya's standard surface material. So we're going to jump into Photoshop. And first things first, we're going to make a brick wall with a window in it. Now, this shape right here, you'll notice, is different from this shape right here. All maps are squares, not rectangles. So the first thing I have to do is I'm going to use my marquee tool with Shift, just drag select a square from my brick wall. Image, crop that. Next, I have to worry about the size of the image. There are different standard sizes that are typically used. A 1K map is 1024 by 1024. A 2K map is double that, 2048 by 2048. We double that to a 4K map, which is 4096 by 4096, and so on and so forth. Generally, you want to keep to map size that match these. Size, set this to pixels. I want to make this something that matches one of those basic sizes, but I don't want to make it larger than what it is. If I start making these larger, then it's going to start having to extrapolate pixels and might start getting blurry details. So I'm going to make this size down to my next smallest map size, 1K map, 1024 by 1024. There we go. And I want to have a window in this. I've already got a window prepared. Control A, Control C, Control V to paste that in. Put my window in here somewhere. Maybe scale a little bit to make it look like it matches the brick wall a bit better. And this is now my color map. Now, whenever I make maps, I always save two different versions of it. One, a PSD with all my layers, which should always have their names. This is my bricks layer, my window layer. So I'm going to save as, yes, into my assets folder, brick wall _ color. And then I'll save out a copy. And this will go to my source images. I'm not going to bother with anything fancier this, I'll just do JPEGs. If I cared about high quality for this, I'd probably use PNGs. Then back into Maya, select my plane, right click, assign favorite. I'm going to put my standard surface on there. Never, ever mess with your initial standard surface. That is the default. Every single object will have that same standard surface on it. So you always want to make a brand new one. And I always like to name them so I know what they are. Brick wall. And I want to make sure I know what this is. This is my standard surface, my brick wall. Color, checkerboard, file folder, brick wall. Of course, nothing shows up at first. Press 6. And there it is. Now, this is a very fake looking brick wall. Look at the highlight on it. It is completely flat and featureless. It looks more like a poster of a brick wall than an actual brick wall. Need to add some details to this. So I'm going to return to Photoshop. Now, I need to give this a bump map in order to make it look a bit more realistic. So, first things first about bump maps. They're grayscale in appearance, but you never ever want to save these things out as mode actual grayscale images. Maya will not accept them. All you need to do is desaturate all my layers. Depending on how many layers you've got when you're working on your maps, that can be kind of tedious to have to desaturate every single one from top to bottom. So I like to do add a hue saturation layer above everything. Now, the way a bump map works is the darker areas look like they stick in, the lighter areas look like they stick out. So the deepest area is black and the highest area is white. And looking at this image right here of the window embedded in a brick wall, we have to think about how the different levels of this should exist on a scale from black to white. The deepest layer in the entire image should be the window panes, so those would be black. The highest layer would be the ledge, the concrete ledge down here that sticks out past the bricks. That would be white. So starting from the window panes, which will be black, the frame itself will be a dark gray. It'll look like it sticks in the most. Next deepest layer will be the mortar that sticks in just past the bricks. And then we have the bricks. And then we have the lightest area that sticks out the most, the ledge. Now, if you look at the bricks right now, you can see that the bricks are in fact darker than the mortar. So the problem is the mortar is going to stick out past the bricks. So I have to grab my layer, Control I to invert that, And now my mortar is darker than my bricks. So now the bricks stick out past the mortar, but now it's still too dark, I think. I'm going to go to Image Adjustments Levels. I'm just going to pull this up a little bit because I want this to be kind of the mid-range. It's not as bright as the ledge will be, but it's not as dark as the metal frame will be either. So I keep this sort of in the middle. Say OK. Next, I'm going to go up to the window, make a new layer. I'm going to call this layer Glass. I'm going to highlight with my marquee tool using Shift to add to the selection everywhere that the glass will be. Like that. This will be black, so I'm just going to paint bucket that solid black. Then I'm going to have my ledge layer. Marquee tool. I'm going to select where the ledge is, and I'll paint that white. And I'm going to go below both of those, and I'll name this frame, and I'll select where my metal frame is, and I'll make that a dark gray, darker than whatever the mortar is. So go down below that a bit. Now, as it is, I've got all this little detail in my brick wall, but absolutely none in my window frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my ledge for starters, and I'll reduce my opacity a little bit, just so I've got some of this detailing in my concrete ledge. It's still very, very light, but it's just transparent enough to bring some of that detail in. The glass, I'll leave that alone. I'll leave my glass flat. And my frame, I'm going to set this, do I want to go straight up multiply? Maybe I'll just make that one slightly more transparent. There. So it is dark without being as dark as the windows, but it still has some little detailing in the bump map. Once again, I save out my PSD. This will now be brick wall bump. And I'll save a copy into my source images, brick wall bump. Make that JPEG. Back in Maya, scroll down through my materials, find geometry, bump mapping, checkerboard. When I click the checkerboard here, it's not going to take me directly to my file node this time though. Bump maps will always take me to an intermediate node called the Bump 2D node. This right here, Bump 2D. In this case, Bump 2D1, because it's the first one I've made in this scene file. The bump value has something assigned to it already. I don't need to add another file to this. I just need to click the little arrow right here, and this takes me to my file node, brick wall bump. And thing to keep in mind, when you add any image to material, keep the color space in mind. If it has color, then you can leave it at the default. If it's a grayscale image, like the bump map, then you want to change sRGB to raw. That'll give you better results. You also always want to turn on alpha's luminance. However, as you can see for the bump map, alpha's luminance is automatically checked. This will not be true for the other maps. Now, looking at our brick wall, I would say that the bump map has added some detail, yes, but it is perhaps a little too exaggerated. I've seen worse, but I'm thinking maybe make this a little bit more subtle. If we right-click on the word bump mapping here under geometry and go to our bump 2D out normal, I can no longer click this arrow and go to the bump 2D node. It takes me to the file node instead. So I have to right-click, bump 2D out normal, and if I want to, I can reduce my bump depth a little bit to make my bump maps slightly less exaggerated. So now just adding subtle detail to the wall instead of making it a little too heavy. Now what's making it look weird at the moment is how shiny my bricks are. To fix that, I have to create a roughness map. For the roughness, the lower the value, the shinier it is. So you can see how smooth and shiny, say, my window pane is now. The higher it is, the rougher it is, and eventually becomes completely matte. So 0 is black, 1 is white. I want to create a roughness map that will make my bricks not too shiny anymore. I don't want to make them completely matte though, because if I make this completely matte, I can't really see my bump map anymore. But I definitely want to have them not super, super shiny. But I also want to keep my metal and my windows fairly shiny. So I'm going to go back into Photoshop. In my brick wall, I want my bricks to be less rough than my mortar, I would say. The mortar is definitely the roughest part of it. If you ever touched a brick wall, you'll notice that the mortar is much rougher than the bricks. So I'm going to go back to my bricks, and invert that to make my mortar roughest. And now I think I'll just go to my levels, keep this all fairly light color. The lighter it is, the rougher it is. I think I will reduce the opacity a bit on my ledge because I want my ledge to kind of match the mortar in value. Once again, I never make anything pure white in my roughness map. That's just too rough. It's too matte looking. I want to have at least some shine to it, so it's always light grays. My frame, I'll keep that fairly dark. Maybe I'll make it slightly more opaque so I don't see quite so much of the individual lines in there. I'm not trying to create lines, I'm trying to make the metal a uniform roughness. And my glass I'll keep completely black, so it's going to be absolutely shiniest thing on here. Maybe I'll lighten up my metal just a little bit. So it's going to be shinier than, say, the bricks, but not as shiny as the glass. Save as, brick wall, rough. And then save a copy. PSDs go to my assets. JPEGs or PNGs go to my source images. So roughness, checkerboard, file folder. There's my brick wall rough. And to make sure it works properly at render time, I'm going to first of all change this to raw and then turn on alpha as luminance. Now you can see my bricks are no longer glossy. They have just enough shine that I can see the bump map inside them. My metal frame is shiny but not particularly glossy, and my windows are really, really glossy. But even though the metal frame is shiny, it does not look like metal. It just looks like shiny gray plastic, which is not what I want, frame metal frame. So let's make a metalness map to control this part right here. Now the metalness map really only needs two things, black and white. Is it metal? Is it not metal? Black means it's not metal. White means it is metal. So my brick wall, that is not metal. I'll make a new layer above that, and I'm just going to paint this solid black. My ledge, that's just going to be solid black. My glass windows, solid black. And the frame itself, solid white. Matter of fact, I can just turn off the window right there, and this is all I need for my metalness map. File, save as, metal, save a copy. Metalness, checkerboard, file, brick wall metal, change this to raw, turn on alpha's luminance. You won't notice any difference here, but if I don't turn on alpha's luminance at render time, it will not read this image. The reason it has to use alpha's luminance is because at render time, it is not looking at the value. It is looking for an alpha channel that has this information in it. And JPEGs do not have alpha channels. So instead, I have to tell it to use the luminance, the value of the image, for the alpha channel. And now it looks more like metal, but not really. You notice how dark it is from certain angles, and you're only seeing shininess. Metal does not have color. It only has the reflections of the environment. If it's not reflecting the environment, it doesn't really look like metal. So in order to make this reflect my environment, I'm going to press 7 on my keyboard, and now I'm seeing my reflections of my environment. If I didn't have this, if I deleted that, it would just be black. Now, we've got our color, our bump map, our roughness map, and our metalness map, but still, this is not completely realistic. I need to add some glass into my windows. So to do that, I'll need to add something to my transmission. Weight will add transparency, everything that is not metal, and you can still see reflections and highlights in my brick wall and everything else because this is a transparent like glass, not just seeing straight through it. So I need to make a map where black is opaque and white is transparent. So I'm going to go back into Photoshop. I'm going to paint my frame black because that's opaque, but my glass is white. Save as, transmission, save a copy into my source images, JPEG, weight, checkerboard, file, semi map, change this to raw, turn on alpha's luminance, and now I can see through it. Because from the right angles, you can still see the reflections on there, so this is now glass. For funsies, if we want this brick wall to look like it's a bit more dilapidated and the bricks are missing from the wall, we could use the opacity right here to make holes in our wall. These will not be transparent like the glass. These will just be empty spaces in our model. I will point out that opacity is a color, not a number. These are required to use raw and alphas luminance. This is not. So I'm going to Photoshop. I'm going to turn this layer off so I can see my brick wall again. I'll leave this up just so I can see where my window is, because I don't want to select any bricks where the windows are. And I can just select some bricks in here to say these bricks right here are going to go missing. So there's going to be some random holes in my wall. Make a new layer. I'll name this layer holes. Paint those black and turn everything else off. I'll turn this back on again, and I'm going to fill this one with white. This will be my opacity map. Opacity. Save a JPEG into my source images. Opacity, file. And now I've got some holes in my wall. Well, you got a dilapidated old building like this. Can't help but wonder if maybe it's haunted. So I'm going to go back into Photoshop. I'm going to turn off the holes. I'm going to invert this again. Turn my glass back on. I'm going to grab a ghost. Copy this. Paste that in here. Put this above my glass layer. I don't need this to be desaturated anymore. I'm going to use this for the emission map. And I want him or her, I can't really tell the gender of my ghost, to show up inside the glass window. So I'm going to put this above the glass and hit Alt, click between them. And now the ghost will only show up where the glass is. So I can maybe shrink this down a little bit. Like kind of like that. Oh, I do want the glass to be black. Like that. See, the emission map will make the surface glow whatever color the emission map is. If the emission map is black, it will not show up anything. If the emission map is bright blue, it'll glow bright blue. If it's white, it'll glow white. So I'll make this little ghost appear as a glowing figure in my window. Save a copy. Oops, not save a copy, just regular save. Save as. Emission. Then save a copy. Open up my emission tab, color, file, brick wall emission. And because this is color, I don't need to change my color space or turn on alphas luminance. I can just add it in as is. Nothing happens at first, but if I increase my weight, there's my little ghost in the window. Spooky. And that covers all the maps that I tend to teach in my introductory class. There are a lot more maps you could make, one for every place where you see a checkerboard on this thing, but most of the time, those are enough to get the details that I'm looking for.